left side, these are some ideas of things that'll lead to a secured bond, someone having to post money. If they don't have many ties to the community, if they have a history of FTAs, failures to appear, like they miss court a lot, if they have a prior record of felony convictions, if this offense involves domestic violence or violence and injury to a person, or they'd have to register as a sex offender if they got convicted, or it's drug trafficking, or it involves distribution of drugs or stalking, things that specifically pose a danger to society or a large risk that they're not going to show up to court. We think in Forsyth County that these things increase the risk to society of these people being released on pretrial release, or increase the likelihood they're not going to show up to court.
Judge, can
yeah,
where you can blow that last screen you had up? Is
yeah,
it can be blowed up? Because I can't read it.
I know it's hard to see. I just kind of wanted to give you all an idea of what some of the forms are that we use. And I know it's hard to read. I'm not really sure.
Take a picture. That's the reason why.
Well, you know what I'll do? I use one of these forms every day. I will scan it and send a copy to Carrie and get that distributed to everybody.
Thank you.
So that you can actually, examine it closely, because this is a form that we use every day in Forsyth County. In fact, this morning, I did it about 4 times at our domestic violence first appearance at 9 o'clock. And here are some of the interesting results that we got in Forsyth County comparing 2019 to 2020 as my 2010 Mac begins to stall. It's only like a minimum of $2,000 to replace a MacBook. Harry, can you kick out Roberto Mendoza?
Gary, you're muted.
Oh, yeah. How did you tell me?
I believe you can click on the top right on
Who's the administrator of the Zoom meeting? If you have administrators, mute them and kick them off.
Thank you.
There we go.
Oh, good.
Well, that was entertaining.
Wow. Never seen that happen before. I've heard about people getting hacked, but I've never seen that.
Well, that was
interesting.
Okay. Yeah, never seen that before.
All right, sorry, let me go back to this. Okay. So can y'all see this again?
Yep.
All right, so I don't want to spend a lot of time on numbers. I know numbers are boring, but looking at 2020, after we implemented this new way of looking at pretrial release, magistrates, who were the first ones to look at bond when someone is arrested, they imposed conditions other than a secured bond. In other words, something other than someone having to post money over 70% of the time in class 2 and 3 misdemeanors, which is what we were looking for. In high-level felony cases, which are class A through E felonies, class A felony is like murder. And those higher level felonies, you're talking about armed robbery, sex offenses, child sex offenses, and adult sex offenses. Almost all those people got secured bonds. And even in intermediate cases, which would be mid-level felonies and below, half of those people got bonds that were less than secured bonds. And what we found comparing 2020 pretrial new criminal charges to 2019 pretrial new criminal charges is that there was actually a decrease of almost 5%. And that was statistically significant. So looking at Forsyth County, comparing 2019 to 2020, new criminal charges when people were out on pretrial release decreased by almost 5%. And, you know, obviously the initial question is that because of COVID? Were fewer people going out and committing crimes? And that is a legitimate question. And I believe at the school of government, they are still trying to parse through that. But as I said, I think there was I think two things were happening parallel to each other. I think fewer crimes were being charged in the first place. And then there was also probably a smaller effect of the pandemic too, that there was less economic activity going on. And so there was also probably less crime, but they're still parsing through that aspect of the data. But I don't think that bail reform can be discounted for that. The number of court non-appearances decreased. So comparing the 4 quarters in 2019 and 2020, the failures to appear significantly decreased. There's definitely, I can say, a COVID effect there because we had a lot less court. We still had court, but we had a lot less court. But there didn't appear to be more failures to appear just because more people were released on pretrial release. Also, we had almost half as many people booked pretrial. So almost half as many arrests. The blue line on top is 2019 and the light blue line is 2020 below that. Now the jail detentions decreased, the stay decreased from about 2 days to 1 day. And finally, we get to a discussion about race. The bookings decreased about 40% in Forsyth County for African Americans. And interestingly, they decreased about 50% for whites. But there was a way, there was an aspect in which there was a larger positive effect for African Americans, and that the number of days that they spent in custody before they were released decreased more than for white inmates. And I don't want to spend too much time when there might be other things to talk about, but I thought y'all might be interested to see some of the charging data, since this is something y'all probably don't get to see a breakdown of very often. Last year in 2020, there were 1.5 million crimes charged in North Carolina. Only about 13% were felonies. The vast majority were misdemeanors. And an even smaller percentage were violent crimes. So the vast majority of crimes are nonviolent. And that's not to say that they're not important, because when you think about nonviolent charges, you have lots of drug charges, you have property crimes, and those are significant. If somebody is helping you move out of your house, working for a moving company, and then they pilfer all of your jewelry or your wife's jewelry, and they pawn it and it gets melted down before anything can be done about it, that's a big deal. But that would be part of the blue area. That wouldn't be part of the orange area. So this is not to say that nonviolent means not important. That's not what it means. But it's interesting to see that violent charges are a fairly small portion of all crime. And for misdemeanor charges, 88% were nonviolent in 2020. About 5% were DWI charges and about 7% were violent charges. And I wanted to show y'all how the drug charges break down because that's interesting. This is how many of the felony charges were drug charges. So this is going back to the felony chart across the state. Blue is nonviolent felonies, and this is the portion of nonviolent felonies that were drugs. That's how much of our system is spent on drug charges. So this is nonviolent, this whole thing other than orange, and the gray is drug charges. 35% of the felony caseload in North Carolina is spent on drug charges, and the vast majority are just possession charges.
Excuse me, Whit, this is
Yeah.
Larry. I'm not sure we're seeing the same screen, or at least I'm not. Then what, I don't see any blue and whatnot you're talking about.
What are y'all
Pretty
seeing?
Very, yeah, that's same.
North Carolina charged 1.5 million crimes in 2020. That's
Yep,
been on the
that's what we're
screen.
seeing.
So maybe the slides aren't advancing. I'm sorry. Thank you for pointing that out.
Surely.
All right. So you're seeing that, you're just seeing this one.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
And it's we see all the smaller slides along the side. So it's
Does
not
that
fu-
change
it's
it
not
at
fu-
all?
It's not full screen, in other words.
You had changed it a second ago, and it went back to the NC charge 1.5 million. Can you switch it to drop it down to the next?
I'm going to stop share and start sharing again. I think that guy messed it up.
You think people would have better things to do with their time?
Yeah, that's awful. All right. Tell me if the slides are changing now.
No,
It's still on the same slide.
it is, yes.
Yeah,
Okay. Well, I'm not
Can you-
sure how to fix that. I'm sorry.
Can you go down the bottom and hit on the view? That's it. Check that one.
Yes,
It's reminding me of World War II demotivated me, you know?
I know.
Go down to where it
So
says
odd.
42 and click on that slide.
yeah. Can you click on go on?
There you go.
there you go.
But y'all are seeing my entire PowerPoint.
Yep.
Yes.
Yes.
Y'all aren't seeing it blown up.
Are,
No.
are you on dual screens?
No, I just have one laptop. It was
Okay.
working before, and something happened when he joined, and now it's not working anymore.
Crazy.
Well, I don't really want to belabor it, but I just wanted to point out that as far as felony charges, drug charges make up this gray right here. Drug
Yes.
charges make up 35% of the felony caseload that we deal with in North Carolina. This blue, half of the felonies are nonviolent, and only about 15% of our felonies are violent. And here's the chart for misdemeanors. You have about 5% DWIs, 7% violent, and then the vast majority are nonviolent. And I also wanted to show you all some incarceration data, but it's going to be even harder to see
Yes, it
if I
is.
can't blow it up.
Anybody that wants it, I can get it from Whit, and I'll be able to forward the presentation.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Well, sorry about that.
The next time that happens, we're gonna have to charge you a quarter.
Whit, sorry for bothering you. I know I think you already tried it, but your presentation mode wasn't selected in the bottom left corner of your screen.
It wasn't?
No, it wasn't. It was the display that we were getting, was the display that was selected on your screen.
Well, what's weird is I didn't change anything from before when the slides were working to after.
Yeah.
The only thing that changed is that moron that
Sorry.
jumped in.
Yeah, I think that was accidental because he was on here. I'm actually in the same building with place with him. I think somebody must have hacked into it because that wasn't anything he did on purpose. It's actually across the hall from me.
Hmm.
I don't know how that happened.
Are you saying you know that
Okay.
person who came in?
Yeah, he's actually in the same in the other room.
Did you see the penis drawings on the screen as well? Has he put that in there?
He didn't do that because I could
Some-
see him.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
that
it
wasn't
looked like-
me. To clarify,
somebody.
I don't know what was happening. I was actually just
Right.
on my computer and I started hearing all this random noise and
Oh, yeah, that's him right there. Yeah, no, it wasn't him. He was in here with me. I think somebody got it.
yeah, no, I think something or so, I don't know what it was, but they hacked under my name, I'm guessing, and they started doing all that stuff. I know for a fact I would never do something.
Yeah, no, he didn't do that. I'm in here. He's actually in the studio that I'm in. So anyway, well, we'll move on. You want to go ahead and close up with?
I don't really have anything additionally to say,
Okay.
other than, you know, I'll tell you from the perspective of a public defender, which I was until December of last year, the DA's office worked closely with us to try and reduce the number of people that were in jail. They didn't, at least in Forsyth County, they did not want more people in jail than needed to be. You know, they weren't moving, you know, a lot of cases for people that were in jail, and they weren't agreeing to unsecure bonds for people that were in custody on violent crimes. And I think everyone can understand why they wouldn't agree to that from their perspective. But for misdemeanors and low-level felonies, for the non-violent things, they were agreeing to unsecure bonds that they might not have otherwise agreed to before the pandemic, because they recognized that it was not a good situation to have a lot of people in custody when the pandemic hit. And, you know, it really became a partnership in Forsyth County. And I think that happened across the state to try to get as many people out of custody that really didn't need to be there. And my hope is, you know, as a judge, that kind of mindset continues, and that bail reform that was tried in Forsyth County and those other counties I showed you on that map becomes bigger. And this is a conversation that is also happening at the General Assembly. I think it's a bipartisan conversation because it's not really a liberal, in my opinion. I don't think it's a liberal or a conservative thing. I mean, if you try to parse through it, they're probably liberal and conservative arguments. I think there's certainly conservative arguments, you know, not that Republicans have a monopoly on liberty, but there are large liberty arguments to not having people, one, overly incarcerated, but two, incarcerated pre-trial before they've been convicted, unless there's an overarching societal interest to that. And two, just the huge amount of money that's spent incarcerating people before they're even convicted. So I think there's movement locally, at the statewide and nationally, to address bail reform. And I think that's good. I think that's good. And judges are involved in it. The school government is involved in it. And I'm glad.
So Whit, this is Larry. The changes in Forsyth, for example, are you keeping them, those changes?
Yeah, I mean, the changes that we made, they were all voluntary anyway. I mean, we still have discretion when it comes to bond. Even with the changes that we made, this was really just, these were suggestions, and then a flowchart form created to help magistrates and our local judges to implement these suggestions. But our discretion to set the terms of pretrial release were never like formally changed. This wasn't, you know, a state law or a local ordinance. No law was actually changed in order to do this. This was a partnership out of a mutual desire to have fewer people incarcerated. It just really didn't need to be, where there wasn't a good reason other than a lot of people's lack of financial ability to post $100, $150, you know?
Oh,
All
no.
right, thank you for that.
Question, Judge, by this being a verbal partnership, with no accountability, actually, my concern is that there are no laws. The laws have to change. And until we change the laws, which allows a disproportionate number of African Americans to be incarcerated. And until we can change some laws, and I heard a young man saying he was running for the US Senate. And hopefully if you win, this is one of the things that you're looking at, because the NAACP is doing a national sweep on this mass incarceration. And we are demanding some policy changes.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And we're going to have to see some policy changes because of the very reasons that, you know, you mentioned. I think when we look at the people who come in contact with law enforcement and who become involved in the prison industrial complex, there's always an economic threshold. And that's something that we don't usually talk about. When we talk about the narrative of being safe and a rise in crime, we always look first to law enforcement, but we don't really, you know, peel back the layers to see what are the root causes of crime. And it's always the case that it is the lack of access to opportunity and resources to improve your life. So if you want to decrease crime, decrease the likelihood of violent crimes, theft, burglary, you give people an opportunity to improve their life, you invest in communities, education, you pay teachers more, you'll see a drop in crime. And I think we need to say that more. We don't say that enough. The first thing that we usually talk about, and it's not our fault, because we're oftentimes conditioned to think that's the only way it can be done. But I guarantee you, you invest in public education, invest in mental health, invest in social workers, invest in the community, you will see a rapid and dramatic reduction in crime. Now, you'll do that if what you care about is reducing crime, right? But it's important. And thank you all for giving me that opportunity. But yeah, those are some of the serious policies that I am eager to work with municipalities to accomplish. And as far as legislation, I support, you know, the George Floyd, you know, Fairness in Policing Act. I think that's something that it passed, you know, the House, and it needs to be called for a vote and pass the Senate. We need baselines for how cops and police officers and law enforcement interact with our communities. And so I think that's very, very, very critical. There's other policy pieces that I support, such as, you know, ending qualified immunity, something that was put into place in the 1960s. That doesn't necessarily have anything with like reducing crime or reducing police violence. It has more so to do with allowing you and I to pursue justice if harm is done to us. And yeah, and sorry, there's something that popped in the chat that caught my eye, but that doesn't just apply to police officers. I just want to put that out there. When people say ending qualified immunity, that is allowing people to, you know, pursue civil cases or civil suits against government officials, including law enforcement. So that means when I'm elected to US Senate, I'm not above the law. If I go out there and harm somebody, I won't be protected by qualified immunity. And I think that's right. I have to live by the same law as everybody else. And I think that is one thing that I think needs to be adjusted in the George Floyd Fairness in Policing Act, because it set limitations. But I think we should eliminate the qualified immunity situation. But those are some of the pieces that I stand for.
Well, I appreciate you, Senator, because the economic piece is one piece that we rarely talk about.
Right.
It's a reason why we continue to build prisons instead of investing in education.
Yes.
Because we are a commodity, being African Americans, when it comes to the penal system. So thank you for bringing that out.
Well, you're very welcome, and it's so important. And we have to contribute to the narrative, and I think the narrative is so important, right? We rarely hear this said, and I think we need to talk about it more if we really want to address crime and make safer communities. The only way to do that is investment in communities.
Somebody's hand is up.
Hello, that was my hand, Antonio. I guess I had a kind of comment and a question, but I graduated from Appalachian State University in 2017. I'm an employer here in Winston-Salem. And one of the things that I saw in my college experience that I think really opened up my eyes, not just to more de jure part of kind of the institutional racist structures built into our criminal justice system, but when I was at Appalachian, I got to see some of the social dynamics. And one of the social dynamics that I saw is I want to disagree with Watkins just a little bit. In part, I think a lot of crime is triggered by economic, social, political disenfranchisement and desperation. But what I saw is that a lot of white middle class, upper middle class kids, well, I guess they weren't kids, they're adults, they're in college, were engaged in criminal activity all the time, usually in the form of underage drinking, marijuana use, heroin, cocaine, a plethora of different drugs. I saw more drugs at Appalachian University than I've ever seen anywhere else in my life. And it was commonly known by the police that college kids use drugs. I'm pretty sure I didn't shock anyone here by saying that. But Appalachian at the same time, when I went there, when I started in 2013, we had the dubious distinction of being the 17th whitest public university in the United States. And when I became an employer here in Winston, which is of course a much more diverse demographically area than Boone is, and I was looking at people who are relatively the same age, college age, except they were young Black men, because we typically hire a lot of Black people. Where we are on Cherry Street is in the Black community here in Winston. And I saw a lot of young Black men having charges that all of my white friends in Boone should have had. And of course, I know that's anecdotal, right? But this was my experience. And at Appalachian, we actually had the opportunity for the chief of police here in Kernersville, Raleigh, Charlotte, and Greensboro to come to our school to kind of talk about these things. And overwhelmingly, we didn't frame it necessarily in white versus Black terms, but more of, why is it that, police officers are so willing to give white college kids the benefit of the doubt when it comes to all this illegal activity, that they are so quickly to criminalize Black people of the same age who don't go to college. And basically what I got from most of the officers was that, when we see those college kids, they basically look like our children. They're quote unquote well-to-do kids, and we don't want to ruin their lives. But yet, no one really said, well, conversely, we don't see young Black men as well-to-do, and we don't mind destroying their lives because they don't have much lives to destroy in the first place. But there's that social dynamic there that we don't talk about that exists. And so I went to a school where white kids were doing cocaine all the time, and the police pretended as if we didn't know which houses, which neighborhoods, which places were receiving prevalent drugs. And another social dynamic that I did see is that the people who were selling drugs overwhelmingly were the kids that were trying to pay for their student debt, their student loans. And overwhelmingly, the kids that were doing drugs were kind of the kids that were more well off. That's the first thing I was going to say. The second thing I was going to say is,
Mr. Antonio, we have a few more things to get to in the program. We're going to have some time to chat at the end. So just hold on to that, and we'll go to a couple of folks at the end, and we'll let you kind of finish your point. But we're running a little behind because of the little mishap we had. So we're going to move into the next presentation. My apologies for cutting you off, but
no, Kerry, can I just say one thing? It'll take 1 second.
Mhm.
And so you got on and you said you were going to disagree a little bit. Unfortunately, you didn't accomplish that because it's not a situation of either or. What you described is a situation of and both. I'll come back to that at the end, but the situation you described is true. And we don't disagree, but it is a situation that is socioeconomic and racial. And I think you talked about that a little bit. Sorry about that. I just wanted to address Antonio's point really quick.
Okay. All right. So we're going to move into, we've got a couple other presentations, and then we'll have some time to chat at the end. I know Gabriel and Al Jabbar had some comments or questions they wanted to make. So at this time, we're going to move into Mr. Ryan Jenkins, who's the chair of the Progressive Policing Reform Committee. And go ahead, Ryan, the floor is yours.
Excellent. Antonio, I just want to say watching Garrett's face while you spoke was amazing. He's our resident expert in drugs, and he lives out that way. And you'll get to hear more from him later. But good evening, everyone. I'm Ryan Jenkins. I'm the chair of the Law Enforcement and Legislative Reform Committee of the Progressive Caucus of the North Carolina Democratic Party. We have a shorter name. It's called Square One. What makes our organization unique is that we're not here to do surface changes, mere rearrangements of the furniture, or altering who and what goes into the machine of the criminal justice system. We recognize that the machine itself is broken. No matter who or what we put into the machine, the results will always be the same. So we have to rebuild the machine entirely. That means going back to square one, hence our nom de guerre. The other thing about us is that there's never been any discussion of what's politically feasible, what we can get passed, what we can get the votes for. Because when you have that kind of discussion, when you use that kind of political calculus, you get surface changes. Once again, you get rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. They're the kinds of things we've been seeing for decades and which have failed to change things again and again. I repeat, the machine is broken. Our program is a highly detailed series of changes culminating in a vastly improved form of law enforcement agency and a review and revision of U.S. laws. Every single point has been researched, discussed in depth, and subject to expert advice and criticism. I don't want you all to think we're insane radicals. We're not. This program is almost completely commonsensical. Indeed, many of the most seemingly extreme points have the strongest peer-reviewed evidence supporting them. I'm sure Richard Watkins, as a scientist, you'll appreciate the word peer review. It's something kind of lacking in politics. But let's dive into some of the basics. Law enforcement officers are frequently judged by internal metrics based on interactions with the public. Now, these aren't interactions with the public the way I was taught to interact with people as a Boy Scout, do a good turn daily. These are things like tickets, arrests, mediations even. And when you encourage people, when you judge the success and efficacy of a group by these kinds of interactions, guess what it encourages? Those kinds of interactions. The efficiency of a police force is to be judged by how rarely it is needed. That's not a new line. That was literally one of the founding principles of the London Metropolitan Police in the mid-19th century. Yes, we're literally trying to get American policing into the mid-19th century. That's how backwards it is. A related issue to this is the use of predictive algorithms by law enforcement. This is a practice which is becoming far more common, where you put data into a machine, all the criminal data, police data that's been picked up, and the algorithm can use a complex series of statistical analyses and tools to predict when and where crime will be committed, by whom, and etc. If you've seen Minority Report, it's like that, only there aren't like 3 psychics in a vat. It's literally just a computer. And while these can be somewhat accurate, and there is a great deal of promise in them, the practice needs to cease immediately. And the reason is, how do I put this? When you have all the racism in America, and we can say unconscious bias if people want, but America's a deeply racist country. We know through all facts and anecdotal evidence that the police disproportionately arrest and harass Black and brown people. Well, when that's the data that gets put into the machine says, oh, you need to go target Black and brown people. And then there's more data that gets fed into the machine. I like the machine analogy because it really does fit. The simple reality is that predictive algorithms are yet another broken machine. We can't afford to have them. So it's a positive feedback loop of the most diabolical sort. And importantly, it's one that is very deliberately designed to have an automatic defense built in against any accusations of racism. Because it's just a machine, it's just an algorithm. Computer codes can't be racist. But I promise you, if we continue on the road towards predictive algorithms, racial profiling will not only become legal, but universally practiced in the United States. So my last point is on the discussion, my last point of discussion rather, is on the training of police officers once they've entered the profession. First, it isn't standardized, it isn't regular, and it isn't regulated. Secondly, it's primarily focused on what policing is today, which again needs to advance into the mid-1800s. Police need to be trained to assess situations and immediately summon the proper professionals. Garrett's going to be covering a lot of that. In addition, training needs to be focused on public service, community engagement, de-escalation. This has to be the norm. The training must be standardized, regular, and regulated. And as with any other real profession, failure to complete the training and meet specific criteria must result in mandatory repetition or termination. So I'm now going to pass this on to my friends Larry and Garrett to discuss more specifics of the plan. But I hope everyone realizes that the end result of this is a policy agenda that we can rally voters to by planting our flag and showing the world that we are the party of the future and that the future is now. Carthago delenda est.
Well, thank you, everyone, or thank you, Ryan. My name is Larry Dotson, and I want to thank the African American Caucus for inviting us to join them this evening. And
Larry?
yeah.
Larry, you going next? You going? Larry?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Go ahead. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Did you hear my introduction?
I did not.
All right, I'll start over again. My name is Larry Dotson, and I want to thank the African American Caucus for inviting us to join us this evening. Can you all hear me now?
Yeah.
You can, okay, great. So before I start, I want to emphasize that we are not anti-law enforcement. We do not want to defund the police or anyone else. Cops have a difficult job, and it's made all the more difficult by not having the support of the greater community, and we want that to change. I was asked to speak on police culture and oversight, as I have perhaps had a closer working relationship with police than others in our reform group. As a firefighter for the city of Asheville for over 25 years, I responded with law enforcement on an almost daily basis. Also, I have served on the Buncombe County Sheriff's Personnel Advisory Board since 2018. And this is a 5-member board established in 1973 by the North Carolina General Assembly to advise the sheriff on personnel matters. And interestingly, it's the only board of its kind in the state. We're the only one mentioned, the only county in that statute. So we as a country can perhaps derive some hope from the many tragic incidents that have occurred at the hands of police in the past few years. That is, that meaningful legislation and policy changes may finally be coming. That is great news, but legislation and policy do not drive behavior. Culture does. There is a quote attributed to Peter Drucker: "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." Or put another way, attempts to enforce policy that clash with culture are doomed to fail. This helps to explain why we cannot expect that training alone will change police culture. We cannot expect that requiring hiring of minorities alone will remove racism, the racism we see in police culture. And we cannot expect that regulating police unions alone will overcome the insular tendencies of police culture. Let's take a look at some of the components that make police culture what it is today. Some desirable and some not so much. Service to the community, empathy towards others, and being the peacekeepers and guardians of the community. Unity, sticking together in tough times is a strong suit. Another component of police culture is an us versus them mentality, with a them sometimes being most everybody else. Male chauvinism. I see many in the profession still feel the job of policing is no place for women. Being macho, where the beating of bodies is justified and even glorified. Secrecy or lack of transparency. And of course, racism has been a dark element of police culture from the beginning of policing in our country. Another component is death anxiety. As a conscious beings who are aware of our existence, we are also aware of our own mortality. For police, this awareness can create a fear of what is behind every door, around every corner, and what might be pulled out of any pocket. These are some of the components we see in police culture today. So how can we go about making changes to police culture? And I believe it starts with leadership. Leadership from our elected officials having the courage to legislate changes, while at the same time understanding that legislation has its limitations. Also finding leaders within law enforcement agencies willing to work with members to create positive change. Change they themselves must be willing to display while creating buy-in from officers. Also, hiring is an area that can have a huge impact on the culture of an organization. Developing positive values and purpose within an organization, and laying out what is acceptable and unacceptable behavior. Organizational culture must be built over time and reinforced daily. It is the pressure and immediacy of decision-making at critical times that will test that culture. Another topic we cover in our Square One reform measures are educational requirements for entry-level law enforcement. Often all that is required is a high school diploma or a GED. And in North Carolina, basic law enforcement training, or BLET, is mandated before hirees are able to patrol our streets. It's a 640-hour course, and that takes approximately 16 weeks to complete. And it concludes with a comprehensive written exam and skills testing. Compare that 640 hours to the requirements to become a registered barber in North Carolina, where individuals must complete at least 1,528 hours of training at an approved barber school and perform 12 months of apprenticeship supervised by a licensed barber and pass the state board examination. And this is to wash, cut, and style hair. Nearly 2.5 times the training hours required to legally use deadly force in the enforcement of our nation's laws. And someone who aspires to be an electrician or a teacher is looking at a minimum of 4 years of education before they can start their careers. Square One is calling for a minimum of a bachelor's degree or equivalent. Many other countries have that same requirement, and there are around 18,000 police agencies within the US, but there are no national standards on training or educational requirements. And I want to highlight some average entry low education requirements in a few countries. So in the US, it's around 600 hours to become a police officer. And the average requirement for our neighbor to the north, Canada, is about double that, 1,200 hours. England requires 2,200 hours. Australia and Germany come in at 3,500 and 4,500 hours respectively. In Finland, they're over 9 times what the US requires. They're 5,500 hours of education before being sworn in as an officer. These numbers are striking and have deadly outcomes. Per capita deaths by police in the US are about 16 times that of Finland. And this cannot be explained away by the levels of gun ownership either. The US does lead the pack here as far as gun ownership, but Finland is not far behind. Next, I want to talk very briefly about oversight. Square One is calling for independent civilian boards to oversee all personnel hiring, promotions, firings, and other disciplinary actions. These boards must be chosen by the communities most affected by policing and have the ability to investigate using subpoena powers. While many large cities in the US do have some form of civilian oversight, they often lack the authority needed to be effective. And again, there are no national standards. There is a National Association for Civilian Oversight, Law Enforcement, or NACOL, and it's a great resource for police oversight. And I would like to go over some of their suggestions as well. So NACOL recommends civilian oversight boards should be proactive, not just reviewing misconduct complaints, which is often the case for these boards, but they should also include independent analysis of police data related to use of force, stop and frisk, or other procedures, financial auditing and recommendations, review of policies, independent investigations, and proposals to address systemic issues. They should be independent. Independent authorities, not subsidiaries of the police departments they oversee. They must be independent from political processes. These oversight boards must be independent and permanently secured financially. And they must have independence of voice. Oversight should not keep secrets for law enforcement. They also recommend they should be community driven. Oversight should be conducted in part or in whole by the people most impacted by the policing in their communities. And they must be empowered to have the authority to subpoena and witness documents and subpoena witnesses and documents. There should be statewide repeal of laws that prevent public access to and publications of police records on disciplines and other matters of police concern. They should have final decision-making authority on disciplinary matters, adjudicating use of force, recruiting practices, and creating policies. And they must be transparent. All meetings and reports should be public, and all operations should be transparent. So thank you for tuning in with us this evening. I'm going to turn it over to Garrett now, unless you have any questions. Anyone has any questions?
We're gonna save questions for the end. We'll just
Okay.
go ahead and move on to Garrett. Floor is yours.
Right on. Thank you all for giving me some time this evening to bend your ear. My name is Garrett Lagan. I am a licensed clinical social worker and a licensed clinical addiction specialist. So when Ryan says I'm an expert on drugs, it's literally true. I began my career in mental health and substance abuse treatment at a therapeutic community in Vermont in 2003. Earned a master's degree in social work from UNC Chapel Hill in 2010. And since then, I've been working in rural Western North Carolina in a variety of mental health and substance abuse treatment settings. Over the course of my career, I've had the opportunity to partner with local law enforcement to get appropriate care for the clients I serve. I have treated patrol and correctional officers directly as my clients. I have also seen maltreatment and abuse of my clients within the criminal justice system. Some of those mistreatments were about the officer. Just as often, it was about systemic issues. When Ryan invited me to contribute to this project, I leaned on those experiences. I also reached out to other social workers and community organizers that I've met over the past decade of practice in Western North Carolina. My recommendations aim to reduce unnecessary public interactions with armed officers and reduce the likelihood of lethal response by those officers during interactions with the public. So Whit covered the percentage of drug offenses in the among our incarcerated folks. So I'm not going to rehash that stuff. What I will mention is that in 2018, the most recent year I could find, about 17% of North Carolina's locked up population had a mental health diagnosis. That's roughly 4 times higher than the rate of mental health diagnosis in the population at large. In North Carolina, so far this year, 41 people with mental health diagnoses have been killed by police. Some of these deaths may have been prevented if mental health professionals had been dispatched rather than an armed officer. It's neither radical nor difficult to review a sample of 911 calls from any given jurisdiction and identify the calls that we can handle without guns. If we just never bring guns into the situation, fewer people are going to get shot. Recently, Asheville decided to stop using armed officers for a lot of calls. After a big chunk of their workforce quit, they simply didn't have the capacity to send armed officers to, for example, take reports about trespassing after the trespasser was gone. Most police departments already know which calls they don't need to send an armed response for. Many jurisdictions have already developed programs to dispatch mental health and substance abuse workers to handle calls that fall within our area of expertise. Charlotte launched a program like that last October. Durham is currently working through their launch of a similar program. Why are we even having to do this? Why are we having to talk about how to set this up now? In 2001, North Carolina decided to privatize critical mental health care services when we passed House Bill 381 into law. Prior to that, we had county mental health clinics. Now we don't. Privatizing mental health care was a bad idea because there is no profit available in this field. Private enterprise only does a good job meeting needs when there's money to be made by meeting those needs. My clients don't tend to have private insurance. They don't tend to have a lot of money to pay out of pocket for expensive services. This is not a field that is ripe for good quality care if it's privatized. At the time, critics of privatization predicted that privatizing mental health would result in a fragmented system that was in and of itself a barrier to treatment. Private providers would cherry pick patients, and service delivery would suffer from fraud and profit taking at the expense of quality of care. All of those predictions came true. We can repeal or amend that state law and allow state agencies to directly provide mental health services again. I suggest these services be added to the scope of county health departments. We already have a variety of services in operation in North Carolina that can do this job successfully. One such model is literally called Mobile Crisis Management, or MCM. It's a community-based intervention for people experiencing escalating emotional symptoms, behaviors, traumatic circumstances that have compromised that person's ability to function at their baseline within their family, within their living situation at work, in the community, wherever they are. MCM involves all supports, services, treatments necessary to provide integrated crisis response, crisis stabilization, crisis prevention. Interventions can include outreach, de-escalation, symptom stabilization, and crisis counseling. Mobile crisis is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 a year. That's the legal service definition. And it can be provided in the home or in community-based settings, wherever the person in crisis is. Crisis response provides an immediate triage, assessment, evaluation, access to acute mental health, intellectual or developmental disability, or substance abuse treatment services. It provides access to treatments and supports to affect symptom reduction, harm reduction, or to safely transition individuals in acute crisis to appropriate crisis stabilization or detoxification supports. If there is, say, a welfare check or a wellness check called in to 911, and somebody in the community is worried that someone they know might be going to kill themselves, that's who should respond to that, not armed officers. The administrative entities that we created when we privatized mental health already contract with private providers to deliver this service in most counties in North Carolina. These services are understaffed and they're underfunded. This treatment model could be housed within the scope of county health departments, and it could be dispatched by 911. Currently, those services have separate hotline numbers that is nowhere near as widely known as 911. If we take the emergency line that everybody already knows and we allow it to dispatch the existing appropriate emergency service, we're going to save lives. Mobile crisis or any of the mental health crisis teams launched by our larger cities won't really be successful without building out more capacity for the social safety net that anti-tax advocates have been actively killing with their Starve the Beast strategy. And that strategy went into overdrive during the wave of austerity budgets that states enacted in the wake of the 2007 recession. I can't tell if Mr. Jabber's trying to flag me down. Sorry, I thought I saw a hand go up. Okay. One component of the safety net harm reduction infrastructure that North Carolina still lacks is the supervised injection site. So this really freaks people out at first when I start talking about this, especially in a state where the legislator is trying to reverse progress that we've made with needle exchange programs. Supervised injection sites are programs where IV drug users can go and use under the supervision of trained medical and substance use treatment professionals. These sites show promise for reducing overdose deaths. If you are injecting a drug under the supervision of medically trained professionals, the chance that you're going to die of an overdose is basically zero, and that is borne out by the data because no one has ever died at one of those sites. They are also showing great promise for reducing the spread of bloodborne pathogens because they provide clean equipment. So you're not going to be sharing needles and transmitting HIV or hepatitis or any number of other things. It's also a gateway to recovery because you are interacting with medical professionals, you are interacting with substance abuse treatment professionals when you go into these sites. And one of the things that we do is motivational interviewing and build the relationships that help move people into recovery. So the more exposure you have to that, the greater chance that when you're ready, you're in contact and you know who to call. So a multi-year study of 75 supervised injection sites around the world showed zero increase in crime in the communities where those facilities were located, which is a common concern and objection to those programs. So I want to make sure that I mentioned that. Besides legalizing and opening safe injection sites, we can further reduce public interactions with armed officers by fully funding our homeless shelters, building capacity for inpatient and during treatment mental health programs. Thank you for nodding to that, Mr. Watkins. And building capacity in our substance abuse treatment continuum of care. Particularly with homelessness, that was designed for city homelessness. The way that we measure homelessness does not account for the way homelessness shows up in rural communities. So that definitional issue undercounts homelessness in our rural communities. If you live at a campground year round, you're not counted as homeless. Some interactions with police, however, are going to be inevitable. To reduce the likelihood that those interactions become lethal, there are some mental health interventions that can be deployed. I want to be really clear that when I talk about this stuff, these interventions do not target an officer's racial bias. The Square One agenda has other interventions intended to identify and intervene on racial bias. I don't expect that this stuff would fix that. Coal miners get black lung, football players get CTE, law enforcement officers get PTSD. Police training conditions the workforce to be constantly aware of and ready to react to potentially lethal threats. These are two of the hallmarks of PTSD, hypervigilance and elevated startle response. The situations that officers are expected to respond to, the ones that they encounter in the line of duty, significantly increase the risk of developing PTSD. In the aftermath of officers killing people, we often hear that the officer was afraid for their life. PTSD involves intrusive memories and thoughts about past traumas that trigger emotional distress and physical responses in the current events where they're not appropriate. You're responding to your trauma in places where it just doesn't apply. So the impact that these symptoms can have on people tasked with using good judgment in high-risk situations seems like it's obvious to me, but it's also backed up by research. PTSD impairs judgment and crisis response. Implementing a robust and normalized system for proactive likelihood of officers developing PTSD, which of course is good for them to not develop that in the first place. And it also reduces the risk of symptom presentation resulting in loss of life when they're interacted with the public. In 2018, SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration, it's the Department of the Federal Government, published a research bulletin on first responders' behavioral health concerns, emergency response, and trauma. Among other structural interventions, they recommended rotating assignments. And this is a big one for the Square One agenda, is making sure that people have rotating duties that reduce their exposure to potentially traumatic events and negative interactions with their community so that they are less likely to develop PTSD. In trauma work, we talk about simple and complex trauma. So simple trauma is car accident or earthquake. One event, it's a one-off. You can get PTSD from those things. Complex trauma is the cumulative effect of multiple traumatic events. So that's stuff that you see from survivors of domestic violence, kids growing up in violent households, soldiers coming back from long deployments in war. That's more complex trauma, multiple events. While not everybody exposed to traumatic events ends up developing PTSD, it's estimated that about 17% of law enforcement officers develop PTSD over the course of their careers. It's the second highest profession for PTSD after soldiers. In addition to rotating duties, SAMHSA Research Bulletin recommends using resilience training and promoting engagement with counseling support services. Cited studies found improvements in workforce mental health measures lasting between 6 and 12 months after intervention, after engagement with counseling. And that faded over time. And that's why the Square One agenda recommends standardizing regular mental health engagement for all law enforcement agencies and officers with free confidential follow-up and treatment on at least a yearly basis. So those are the interventions that I contributed to this project, and these guys approved of very graciously. And I really appreciate your time. Let me talk about them. I also have citations for a lot of the stuff that I just said that I'm going to drop in the comments.
Thank you very much, Garrett. That was a great presentation. And to Larry and Ryan as well. What's going on? He just dropped something in the chat. So what we're going to do now is go to have a couple of questions, and then we're going to let Mr. Watkins give some closing statements. So Gabe, are you on? Gabriel?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, Gabe is one of our members of our Forsyth County Progressive Caucus. Go ahead, Gabe, the floor is yours.
This is a question for, is it Dr. Watkins or Mr. Watkins? Which do you prefer, sir?
It's Dr. Watkins.
Candidate?
Okay,
Dr.
thank you.
Candidate, what?
Doctor, do you have any policy ideas or policies that you support to reduce the usage and the dependency on for-profit prisons, be it in North Carolina or the United States as a whole?
Wait, there's already policies that exist at the legislative level, such as I believe Ayanna Pressley has one to get rid of private prisons, and I completely support that. I mean, it's morally unacceptable. It just, in my opinion, it's, you know, it's morally corrupt, morally bankrupt to profit off of the incarceration of peoples. And also there's a profit that includes being able to trade incarcerated individuals to other systems. Now, there have been massive efforts, and it has a lot to do with public outrage that our prison industrial complex is on the ropes. Now, I don't want to suggest that they're not still making billions, but they're having to reimagine themselves right now due to public pressures. I believe Joe Biden put in place that we are going to stop funding private prisons, and these main privatized corporations that built these prisons, they've actually started reinventing themselves and making a lot of money based on detentions in association and collaboration with ICE. So they've had to reimagine themselves now so that they can make a lot of profit that way. But Gabriel, I am 100%, I'm assuming, on your side of getting rid of private prisons and also the privatization of detention centers as well. And I support Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, who supports that as well.
Yes, sir.
All
Thank
right.
you for your answer.
Dr. Watkins, my question would be, if you're elected Senate, what if you could change one policy with regards to whether it's just policing or just the entire criminal justice system, what would it be? What would be your one goal to see happen?
You're just making me pick one. That's really, really hard.
For now, we'll have some other conversations later, but what would be your top priority in terms of having some equity in our criminal justice system?
All right, well, I think I'm going to do two things so I can try to have my cake and eat it too with this question, right? So one, I said at the very beginning that I wanted to end, qualified immunity. And I want to create systems, a better system where everybody lives by the same laws, and people who are harmed by government officials and law enforcement can seek justice. But I want to be a champion for reinvesting in mental health services and personnel. I mean, I said this at the beginning, I just want to reiterate, and I can do this because this last part is not necessarily a policy. It's like championing and working with municipalities, right? Also supporting community-based oversight and community-based interventions. I also want to increase investment in public education and pay our teachers more. North Carolina, on average, pays its teacher like $48,000, where the national average is $60,000. Now, I did say one policy is, but if I can just do one more policy, that's to create a baseline for teacher pay at $60,000. So North Carolina can no longer pay its teachers $48,000. And we just discussed how related lack of investment in social work. Shout out Garrett, being a social worker. My wife also got her master's and PhD in social work at UNC. So thank you for what you're doing. Massive investment in social work, massive investments in mental health care providers and personnel, and then also public education and in community-based interventions. All of those things are important. And also I want to say shout out to Antonio. Thank you for pointing that out. That is an excellent point right there, Antonio. There are ways that we can make our world safer that aren't necessarily law enforcement based. And we have the means to do it. We have the talent to do it. We just have to invest in it today.
Thank you, sir. That was a awesome response. Anybody have any other questions? Mr. Jabbar, I think you had your hand up. Go ahead.
Yes, let me start out by saying I heard a number of you say you graduated from UNC. My daughter graduated from UNC, and I'm very disappointed at the decisions that's being made. Again, we right back to the race issue. And until people start to stand up, if those athletes down there at Carolina would say, I'm not going on the field, I'm not going on the basketball court until some things are changed. The only way you affect change in this capitalistic society is affect the cash flow. So, you know, when we talk about prison reform or police reform, I think Dr. Watkins spoke on it a little bit earlier, that we have to understand, first of all, let me make this quick point, because the history of policing really started when African Americans was released from slavery. That's when we began we began policing. If you go back and check the history out. And so this is a culture that has been in existence for such a long time. And I don't know, until we can get some people in political positions to come up with laws to change this process that we're dealing with, we'll be sitting here 10 years from now having the same conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jabbar. We will go to Antonio.
Thank you again for giving me the opportunity to speak. And I just wanted to say really quickly 2 things. So I'm the former chair of the Affordable Housing Task Force for the Boontown Council. So I just want to know, was Garrett shocked or surprised that I was saying that there was heavy drug use on Appalachian State University campus? And then the next thing I want to say is geared toward Dr. Watkins. Apologize for not calling you doctor earlier, I didn't know. But to me, as a historian, I graduated actually in history at Appalachian. One of the things that became apparent to me is that the Democratic Party is actually one of our largest enemies in terms of criminal justice reform. And right now, we have what I think most people recognize that Joe Biden is at the very least a former racist. In 1984, he was trying to pass what would become the 1994 crime bill. And it was actually rejected by the Reagan era Republicans because it was seen as much too harsh, as much too conservative a bill. Just think about that. That was under the Reagan era. And we know about Willie Horton. I mean, Reagan was outright in his racism, particularly when it came to criminal justice reform. And even Reagan Republicans had to reject the crime bill that was being led by Joe Biden. And of course, he would pass that crime bill under Bill Clinton in 1994. And we know Bill Clinton himself was so hard on crime that he actually had to get off the campaign trail and watch the execution of we don't use this term anymore, but in the 90s, we're still using mentally retarded. Mentally retarded, I think the young man is a Black young man. He was 21 years old. He was so confused about his state that he had actually asked for his peanut butter and jelly sandwich if they could save it after his execution. And then Bill Clinton went back on the campaign trail to say, if you doubt that I'm tough on crime, I'm tough on crime. The expansion of the private prison system we saw explode under Bill Clinton. Michelle Alexander, who writes to us, The New Jim Crow, talked to us quite thoroughly about how Democrats have actually been pushing the expansion of mass incarceration for Black people. And so my question, I guess, for Dr. Watkins is, what are you going to do to fight against your own party, which kind of uses the Black vote? But then when it comes to delivering actual changes in the criminal justice system, we still don't have a national registry for police. We know in the United States that police kill about 1,000 US citizens a year. We know about 225 of those people will be people with mental disabilities. We know about 200 of them will be Black, 215. That accounts for about 20 to 25% of people being killed by police are Black men, and Black men only make up 6% of the US population. And we also know from criminologists from Penn State to actually Appalachian State University that when it comes to reporting, police underreport the number of people they kill by 50% across the United States. And so I'm wondering, what type of, legislative agenda do you have to really answer to those on the national level? And how are you also going to push your Democratic colleagues who seem so hesitant to even talking about serious police reform?
To beat them, I've got to beat them. Primaries where Democratic ideology is fought. You win, you'll be able to contribute to the public narrative. A narrative that says that a way to make our community safer is to invest in mental health, services and personnel, education, community interventions. But we have to beat them. That's the only way to hold individuals' feet to the fire. It was said earlier that a huge way to hold people accountable is to withhold money. Well, another way is to take power. Then we'll be able to support individuals trying to put an end to the privatized prison system, which you so eloquently said exploded under Democratic governance. I am not a career politician. Listen, if I was okay with the direction that things were going in, I wouldn't even be in the race. Why would anybody risk all of this? Time away from family, everybody poking and prodding, saying you can't do it, the amount of money involved or against you. I agree with you. I don't like the way things are going. So that's why I threw my hat in the ring. To make a change that says in order to make our world better, you have to invest and support and care for the community, no matter who you are. Not just rule with an iron fist. There's no evidence that that works. And so I must win. That's the only way it can happen. And hopefully I answered your question, but that's why I'm in this.
All right, thank you, Dr. Watkins. So we'll take one last question or comment. Does anybody have one for closing? No? Okay. All right, go ahead, Richard. We'll give you the floor for a couple minutes to make your closing statements of why you would like to get support, and we will go ahead and close up for the evening. The floor is yours.
Yeah, well, thank you all so very much. It was just a real pleasure to be what felt to me amongst like minds. You know, my students at UNC, they don't clap. If they hear something that they like, they'll do this. And after each and every one of your little boxes lit up and you started to talk, all I wanted to do is just snap or say amen as mentioned in the chat. I think these sentiments are growing. 15, 20 years ago, we weren't here, but we're moving in this direction because change is necessary and change must happen now. And if we work together, it will happen. We will have a massive reduction in over-policing, police violence. Investment in the right areas, ways that actually improve people's lives and give them a chance and create opportunities, which, by the way, isn't just good to the individual that is given the opportunity. It works out for everyone. You give a person an opportunity to advance themselves, they create services, opportunities, breakthroughs, economic engines for the rest of us. It doesn't help us to rule impoverished communities, because that's what we're talking about. And we didn't really get a chance to go into it again with Antonio, and he was raising a very good point. But all of this is governance and occupation of impoverished communities. There are racial discrepancies and disparities. That does exist. But also within that, there are massive economic disparities as well. And that's what we have to really address. You address poverty, you provide resources, provide healthcare, which includes mental health. I want to say that I also have a problem with the distinction between healthcare and mental health care. They're the same thing. So we have to provide care for individuals, and you judge a society on how it treats the sick, how it treats the poor. And I think if we work together, when we look back, we're going to say we made our society a more perfect place, a better place, because we supported the poor, we healed the sick. And with that, I'll just say that it is an honor to be here and work alongside of you. I really appreciate it. Thank you all so very much.
All right, thank you very much. One person would like to recognize just came on, one of our State House members. Amber, are you there? I see you on the screen.
I'm here.
So we're about to close up, but I just wanted to see if there was anything you would like to add to the conversation. And Dr. Amber Baker is one of our State House reps that's working hard. I know personally some of the things she's doing. So is there any kind of legislative update or anything you wanted to add to the conversation before we close?
Well, I mean, locally, I'm excited that we just recently was able to bring $100,000. Was able to bring $100,000 in from the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency to partner with the county to get 11 homes repaired on, 6 of which fall right into District 72. So I'm super excited about that. And so just keep letting me know what your issues and concerns are. I'll keep working on trying to bring funding to the city. You guys know that we're in the middle of budget negotiations right now. And we still don't have a house budget. So not sure if any of the things that we're trying to get funded for the county will appear in the budget, but we're going to still keep fighting. So in that budget is a bill that I'm kind of nursing through. It's $250,000 to bring money in for community summer programming. And while it won't help us this year, it will help us next year. And, you know, with all of the balance that we're encountering in the communities, we've got to get money funneled back in for our young people to have things to do. Hopefully, the Urban League will be able to tap into some of that money for summer job training. And so trying to look at the picture from the broad picture from the state about how I can fight and advocate to bring more money into the county, because we've got to do something about our crime and the violence that's in the community. And so those are the two big things that I'm kind of dealing with right now. And also we got the conveyance bill passed, so we're excited about that. And what that is it allows the city now to be able to take the property that they own, either houses or property like land, and actually build low income, affordable, and my new term is workplace housing. So I'm super excited to be a part of that. It's taken us 3 years to get that through, but sometimes it's just having the right people in office who won't say no, who won't accept no for an answer. So that's it for right now, and I look forward to continuing to hear from our candidates that are interested in holding the U.S. Senate office. And I think the points that was raised about taking the Black vote for granted when it comes time for campaigning, and then we're not able to get any of our legislation through, is a key point. So I would say to the candidate, you know, be willing and ready to continue to hear that conversation. And be willing to know what you can do. And as a first-time legislator, I know that it's hard for us to do things that first year, but we've definitely got to push the ball and make people stand up and make good on the promises that they make out here on the campaign trail. And so that's all I have to say.
All right, thank you so much, Amber. All right, we're going to go ahead and close. I want to give a big thanks to Dr. Watkins for coming on and speaking with us this evening. I really appreciate you spending your time to come on and talk to us. Also, Judge Davis, who had to step off, he did a great job, and anybody that wants the info, we're actually going to have a library, but I will have the slideshow that he has to go along with the presentation last week or last month that Angelique Leggett did that's on qualified immunity. So we'll have a library of all of the projects that we're working on that people can go and research. Ryan Jenkins, Larry Dodson, and Garrett, you guys did a fantastic job. Appreciate you guys input in kind of educating us. So we will be able to edit this, so the part that we got kind of hacked on and messed on, we'll be able to take out of here. So, but thanks to everybody for joining. We will have a third round that we will set up for next month, or we'll address some different issues as well. So we'll be updating everybody and sending out some info on that. So thanks everybody, and enjoy the rest of your evening, and we will definitely chat later. If anybody wants to contact me on anything, it's Kerry Pay, Kerry Peay @Yahoo, and we will see you later. Thanks everybody for participating. Have a great evening.